Imagine you have an internal guide, what we might call our true self, always there to help you feel good about yourself, make wise decisions, and steer you into a more loving relationship with yourself. It's your inner compass, helping you stay grounded and positive. If you missed it, we explored this divine part of ourselves in episode 4. There's also our ego, a different kind of guide. It's there to reveal the outdated beliefs and self-doubt that's holding us back. But because of the running commentary it gives us, based on all the programming we took on as a child, it can make us question our worth and abilities, leading to a fractured relationship with ourselves. The question then is, how do you distinguish between the uplifting voice of your true self and the critical chatter of the ego? And more importantly, how can you bounce back faster when you're feeling down? On today's episode of I Love Me, the podcast, we explore how to boost your bounce back rate so you can enjoy a calmer, more on-purpose way of moving through life.
Love, 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 I love me.
Simple, inspiring lessons in self-love. Hi gorgeous, it's Tamara here. Let me begin today's episode by sharing this. There is no such thing as a grey sky. The sky is always blue. Sometimes, however, grey clouds come and cover the blue sky, and this can make us think the sky is grey. Well, it's the same with our minds. The blue sky can be likened to our true self, the part of us that is free from the conditioning of our mind, the part of us that sees our brilliance, the part of us that was always designed to be our wise guide. That is our blue sky. And just as the blue sky is always there, so too is our true self always there. It's just that sometimes grey clouds, we can liken the grey clouds to our ego, sometimes those clouds come in from time to time and block out the blue sky. The blue sky is still there. It's just that we can't see it. And for some people, it may feel like they're constantly living under a cover of grey clouds. Their ego always the one in charge of their thoughts, their emotions, and their decisions. What we need to understand is that we are not the grey clouds. We are so much more than that. And we get to choose whether our sky is blue or covered in grey. We get to choose whether we're being guided through life by our true self or our ego. That is a choice. And in last week's episode, I shared how I love away the grey clouds of my ego. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I recommend listening to that one now, then coming back to this one. Because in this episode, we're going to build upon what we learnt there. As a quick summary, we learnt that the purpose of our ego is to keep us physically safe and to let us know via negative thinking patterns what things we believe about ourselves. In this way, our ego serves a very important role in helping to show us the limiting beliefs and ideas that we hold about ourselves. Once we know what's blocking us, then we can clear the beliefs that no longer serve us so we can move forward in a way that feels more aligned to our truth. What I highlighted last week was that we never want to let our ego steer us through life, as our ego isn't equipped with the skills to do that. That job is saved purely for our true self. Yes, we want our true self guiding us through life, and our ego is there to keep us out of harm's way and to let us know if there are some mental blocks that need our loving attention. When both our ego and our true self are doing what they're made for, then life is sweet. Problems only arise when our ego sneaks behind the wheel. And I say sneaks because if you've spent much of your life with your ego at the wheel, which is most of us, then it can almost feel comfortable to have our ego guiding us through life. So this is where we want to start to practice noticing how we feel in any given moment, for how we feel is a really good indicator of whether it's our true self that's guiding us or whether our ego is in charge. Put simply, if you feel good, calm, happy, relaxed, unattached to any outcome, at ease, these are pretty good signs you're nice and connected to your true self. On the flip side, we know our ego is behind the wheel when we don't feel good in some way. If we feel bad about ourselves for some reason, if we feel inferior, not good enough, if we feel superior, that's a sign of our ego being in charge, because feelings of superiority are all tied up in judging or comparing ourselves with others. And both judgment of self or others and going into comparison mode are all sure signs of being in ego. If we feel stuck or bogged down in some emotion, if we feel fear or anxiety, if we feel depressed, if we stress about time or go into overwhelm, these feelings are all letting us know that our ego is currently in the controller's seat of our life. Each of us will have different tactics our ego uses to bring us unstuck, and that's okay because it happens, and chances are it will happen quite regularly. For some people, they'll spend most of their time with their ego steering them through life. What matters is not how many times we let our ego sneak in, but how quickly we can hand the steering wheel back over to our true self. And one of the ways to help us with this is identifying what common tactics our ego uses. For me, my ego loves to stress me out about time. But because I have that awareness, as soon as I start to stress about time, I can fill myself up with love, like I teach in episode 3, and then I can know that all is well. I can return to my loving center. Think of a plane. Often it's flying on autopilot. As it does, it will drift to the left or the right. And so the autopilot brings it back the other way to help it come back onto its path. This can happen hundreds of times a minute. In other words, the plane is only ever on its exact flight path for small moments in time, but there is a built-in system designed to get it back on track. We need to be like the plane. We notice when we've drifted off path, and we correct it by bringing ourselves back into alignment, by getting our true self back in the driver's seat. I'll say that again. We notice we've lost our loving center. We'll know because we won't feel so good emotionally. Then you use a tool like the love wrap, which I teach in episode 3, to welcome you back home into the loving arms of your true self. This is the tool I use and the tool I teach all my clients to use to help them reconnect with the loving voice of their true self. Every time we notice that we are in an ego state, we do the love wrap, restore our connection to our true self, and continue on. Then the next time we notice we lose our center, and it may be a couple of minutes later or less, we do the love wrap again. And it doesn't matter how many times we drift from our centered space. What matters is how good we get at bringing ourselves back to our loving space, which takes practice. But know that just like a plane always gets to its destination by correcting itself multiple times a minute, so too can we get to our desired destination if we're willing to commit to noticing when we've left our love zone and steer ourselves back onto our path. We all experience stuff. Emotions can knock us off kilter. People can trigger us into fearful states. Bad news or accidents or unfortunate, unloving situations can take us off our loving path. Our job is to simply steer ourselves back on path. Know that we're not aiming to stay in a loving space 100% of the time. That is never the aim. For life is always blowing us in different directions, causing us to experience a myriad of different feelings. Unless you're a monk meditating in a cave all day, you'll be thrown off balance. That's to be expected. And that monk would most likely be thrown off kilter too if his ex-wife showed up at his cave unannounced. Our job in life is to learn how to come back to ourselves and to practice getting quicker at noticing and then redirecting. That's all. When we know this, we can stop giving ourselves a hard time for coming unstuck and simply embrace it. Embrace our humanness in all its beautiful glory, knowing that losing our loving center and choosing to recenter is all part of the human experience. To begin with, it may be tricky to self-correct. For the more limiting beliefs and suppressed emotions we harbor, the more ammo our ego has. If we're holding on to a whole lot of unresolved stuff, then our ego will trigger more in situations that do not endanger our lives in any way, but simply endanger how we feel about ourselves. Here's the thing though. If we love ourselves, if we're confident in ourselves and trust ourselves and know our intrinsic worth, if we have a healthy belief system, when our ego tries to take us out, it doesn't have much to throw at us because we have a solid, robust sense of self. We'll find it far easier to live from a loving place most of the time. And I say most of the time because our ego will always try and find ways in. But when you get used to identifying it for what it is, it's much easier to simply love it away so you can return to your awesome life where you're free to fly. So when you're starting out on this journey of noticing when your ego's running the show, it's important to show yourself love and compassion and know that in being willing to objectively look at what your ego's showing you and practice coming back to a centered space using the love wrap or another technique you might have, that you will get better and quicker at it. Like anything we learn in life, learning to get ourselves back to a loving space simply takes practice and the willingness to commit to that practice, especially on those days that feel more difficult. But if you do practice this and then continue to practice it some more, you will notice how you start to see more of the blue skies more regularly. More of the blue skies that were always there. Okay, so we know that we will ping pong between our ego and true self, fear and love, many times a day. That's a given. What changes when you start to practice loving yourself back into balance is that your bounce back time is quicker. Your ability to notice your inner fear state and get back into a loving state becomes not only quicker, but easier. Just like a person who needs to go into hospital for a surgery, if they're fit and healthy before the operation, then they generally recover faster than someone who was unfit and unhealthy. They were practicing physical well-being, and so they physically bounce back quicker. When we practice self-love, we get much better at firstly noticing when we've lost our loving center, and secondly, being able to come back to it. Let's look at an example. Maybe losing your job or going through a divorce in the past would have sent you so onto a negative path, you would have had a hard time relocating your positive path to the point that maybe you wallow in your depression for 6 months or more before someone pulls you out of your woeful state and gets you back on board to some sort of mediocre living. If before this had happened, you'd been consistently practicing self-love, building your love muscles and your ability to bounce back, if you'd put in that time and practice, now you lose your job, and while it may come as a shock, you instantly think, well, I wasn't really happy there anyway. This is my opportunity to get out and find something better. And so that's what you do. Use this opportunity to propel you forward. I remember the first time a romantic relationship ended for me, and I was gutted. It literally took me years to get over him. But as I grew my self-love in the following years, entering into and leaving relationships became more easeful. Yes, I'd be upset if a relationship ended. That's a natural reaction. But instead of spending months wallowing in it, I'd spend a couple of hours doing some intensive exercise to boost my endorphins and lift my spirits. I'd clean my house, which kind of became this ritual to symbolize clearing out the old. And then I'd sit down and reflect, journal, tune in on what that relationship had taught me. Once I'd gathered all the lessons that the guy had come into my life to help me learn, I was done. I could move on without feeling bogged down in negativity. In this way, when you practice self-love, you're far more emotionally resilient, so your bounce back is quicker and easier. Essentially, what you're doing when you practice self-love and have self-love practices like yoga, meditation, tuning in like what I do and teach, dancing, whatever it is, when you have these practices, you're preparing yourself to deal with life no matter what comes flying your way. You start to build this resiliency that has you knowing you can overcome whatever arrives into your life. You're essentially preparing yourself to be okay, regardless of what catastrophes or upsets you encounter. Because life does happen, and sometimes it happens full out. When my family moved to France in 2019, we had no idea that 1 year later, a pandemic would shut down the world and we'd be locked out of our home country for the next 2 years. That the pandemic would mean that my husband, who had been a performing musician for the past 8 years, would no longer be able to work. That all the festivals would be cancelled so I would no longer be able to share my work. That the French school system that my son would have to start when he was 2 would be traumatic for him for various different reasons. We didn't know any of this, but we bounced back. Firstly, we moved to the UK to get to an English-speaking country and a place where my son could enjoy preschool in an environment that not only felt safe for him, but where he thrived. He actually ended up at a forest school where he would build cubbies and climb trees and light fires to cook meals on. It was an amazing experience. My husband decided to reskill as a software engineer, and being a UK citizen, managed to get an intensive training course worth like $14,000 for free. And then when the borders reopened, we came back to Australia and started life here anew. But if we got all depressed about the state of our lives, having to sign paperwork to leave our apartment in France for an hour a day and so on, then we would have drowned emotionally. But we'd built a strong self-love container, and that held us through all the big changes we needed to make and helped us jump on the opportunities that made our life not only bearable given the circumstances, but inspiring. I loved forest school. My son got so much out of it, and not something we could have experienced if we'd stayed in France or come back to Australia. Not in the same way anyway. I also learnt how to dress properly for the cold. You get up, you put on your thermals, and then you get dressed for your day. While this may sound obvious to those of you living in the colder parts of the world, this was completely foreign to my Australian upbringing. And my husband was able to reskill and move into a new, more lucrative career. What I'm saying is that when we are resilient because we've cultivated a deep love for ourselves, we can handle almost anything. And not only handle it, but seize the opportunities that those difficulties can open up to us. For in every situation, we have the opportunity to react or respond. When we get ourselves into a state where we can lovingly respond, then we can make much better decisions for ourselves and let the life turbulence that's come our way propel us into clearer skies. Now you know the role of the ego, I invite you to start to notice throughout your day when your ego sneaks into the controller's seat. Then practice using the love wrap to bring you back into the loving, heart-centered space of your true self. But please know, if this is new to you, it does take practice. But with practice, you'll start to really notice a difference in how quickly you can bounce back and enjoy the gorgeous life that you are here to live. Thanks for listening. And if you're loving what I'm sharing here on I Love Me, the podcast, I have just released a brand new program called Heartfelt Manifesting. This program is 4 weeks long and packed full of powerful teachings and techniques designed to help you learn how to create a life of your choosing. If this sounds like your next step, simply go to my website, gettingnaked.com.au, or take a peek at the link in the show notes. And know that if you do enroll in this heart-opening program, that a percentage of profits go to planting trees, so together we can re-robe Mother Earth.